Okay, hello everybody.
Hey Mark, I unmuted you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, I think I can hear you as well. So people are just joining. The count keeps increasing. As of now, we have 53 people, which is not bad for our kind of thing where people start trickling in probably 10 minutes after the call. All right, so I think we have enough. Now we have 54 people.
Now we just have to get the presentation to show.
Yes. Yeah, I can see it now.
Okay, it should be on the first slide.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we are on the first slide now.
Very good.
So thanks, Mark, for doing this. Let me take a minute and kind of introduce the group of people we have here and what we are trying to do. So this, as Ratnakar explained, we are a community from India. We are mostly here as a self-help group, helping each other navigate the things in US, and we do things like investing and immigration, several different things to help each other out. So this EB5 topic has become quite important lately because a lot of people are stuck waiting for green cards, and they want to have some kind of clarity for their future. So EB5 has become a real alternative, and as Ratnakar explained, this is a fairly wealthy community. A lot of people have the resources to be able to make this happen. The hesitation is it safe? Is it guaranteed? There's one thing we people dislike is losing money. So
nobody likes losing money. I think
yeah,
that's a common theme throughout the world.
Yes, and when I do the math behind this, I mean, if you're talking about $500,000 to $1 million, I feel like on an after-tax basis, putting $1 million at a risk is like $1.5 million pre-tax. And even if we assume a lot of members in the group are maybe making around $250,000 to $300K per year as a family, even if they're saving like $100,000 per year, it'll take like 15 years to save that kind of money, and putting it at risk is in my opinion a big deal. So I want everybody to kind of understand the risks they're taking and how to go into it with all of the knowledge, so that I think in my experience I always get the right kind of help rather than just believing something in a news article or some advertisement or something from some friend or something like that. So Ratnakar has had some experience working with your firm, and we all agreed that better to get somebody who's knowledgeable in this thing, and get some real help. So that's the reason for this. And with that, I will pass the ball to you, and you can introduce yourself, and we can go from there.
Okay, very good. So I'm not quite familiar with these type of presentations. So can I just ask Purna if my video is visible?
Yeah, I can see your video as well as your screen.
Okay, very good. So I'll just start, generally introducing myself, and then we're going to talk about EB5s generally, and then we're going to get into more specific issues with EB5s. Whether you want to do a direct investment or if you would rather do a regional center investment. And then we're going to talk about questions that people have had, and we can even open it up for questions, I hope. We're going to get into this gradually. Just a bit of background on myself. I've been an attorney for 30 years. For 5 years, I was in the office of the Chief Counsel for International Trade at the U.S. Department of Commerce in Washington, D.C. where I was involved in treaty negotiations, the NAFTA agreement, amongst other things, and a lot of work with the European community. And then I opened up my own law practice 27 years ago, Goldstein and Associates, and we're an immigration law practice. We have offices in Pittsburgh and in Philadelphia. I've got about a dozen, actually 14 people that work for me, paralegals and attorneys who are very specialized in all aspects of immigration law. We focus on family cases and naturalizations and business transfers and starting up businesses and getting E2 visas, which unfortunately are not available to Indian nationals. We help businesses open up in the United States, and we help them get their personnel into the United States. We do a lot of H-1B work, and we also do a tremendous amount of EB5 work. So having done this for close to 30 years, I'd say that we've got a bit of a reputation and a lot of experience. Some of the attorneys and professionals that work in my company have been working with me for almost 30 years. So it's a good group of people that we work as a team together. One of the attorneys is actually a former USCIS officer who took the law exam, and after he passed the bar, I asked him to join me. So it gives us a real unique insight into how the Immigration Service is actually using or regulating immigration and what they're actually doing. A lot of times immigration attorneys catch on to different ideas that are in the press, and it becomes a rumor, and doesn't necessarily mean it's true. It just means that's what a lot of immigration attorneys are talking about. But in fact, when you have the type of people that have that type of experience working for USCIS, we kind of know how USCIS operates in a different way. So having said all of that, I'm going to try to get to the beginning of the presentation so we can start at the beginning. So the name of the firm is Goldstein and Associates, and I'm the head of the firm. There are no other partners, but I have these other people that work in my office. We're talking about EB5s. The EB5 program originally started in the 1990s with an authorization from Congress. The way it's designed, that you can make $1 million investment in a new enterprise. There's also ways of investing in existing companies, but when you make an investment into an existing company, you have to increase the value and the number of employees by a certain percentage. I think it's about 40%. So there's specific rules about investing in existing companies and what type of targets you have to reach. Usually it's an investment of $1 million, but there are provisions for investments in regional centers where the investment would be $500,000, or if you are doing a direct investment, you can do a $500,000 investment in a targeted employment area, which is an area where the population is a certain amount and in a rural area, or if the level of unemployment is 150% of the national average. So then there's a question, do you want to do a direct investment in your own business, or would it be better for you to get involved in a regional center where a lot of the program is pre-designed and you don't have to manage the business yourself? Another, one of the main requirements is there has to be 10 full-time jobs created within the period. We like to be able to demonstrate that at the outset when you're applying for the conditional residency, but there is then, a period of time where you get a conditional resident status. It takes about 2 years to do that. And then once you get conditional status, you can apply for the conditions to be removed 2 years later. And that takes several years as well. So the entire time of the investment usually is about 5 or 6 years, but you ought to be able to get the conditional residency within maybe 2.5 years. Now, when you compare that to the processing times for EB2 or EB3 cases for nationals from India, where the backlog right now is 2009. And, in addition to that, you have to include processing time. You're looking at, 10 years. So something you can get in and out of in 5 years as opposed to 10 years is, I would imagine, something you got to pay attention to.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question here, Mark.
Go ahead.
So after the 2 years, 2.5 years, you get the conditional, and after 5 years, they stop monitoring, or how long do these 10 jobs need to be existing?
Well, the 10 jobs have to be there throughout the period that they're examining both the conditional and the removal of the condition.
Okay. It is up to 5 years then, 5 to 6 years.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
So I'm going to go to the next slide. There have been modernization rules proposed where the amounts are slated to go up from $500,000 to $1,300,000, and the million will go up to 1.8 million. That hasn't yet been set in regulation or in a law. Congress hasn't agreed on such a thing yet. It's likely to be increased for regional centers and for direct investments, but at this point it hasn't happened. Right now the program is authorized according to the budget until December 21st, and it's likely there's going to be a continuing resolution where it's going to be extended through next year. That's going to happen, I would imagine, shortly. This is the same kind of thing that's happened in the past. Last year, in fact, it happened as well. So using last year as a model, I expect that the continuing resolutions and the budget passing would extend the program, most likely. So let's talk about regional centers for a moment. It takes a different type of person to do a direct investment and to do a regional center. I've talked to people about doing direct investments. I recently had a group that approached me that wanted to do a direct investment because they're businessmen and they already do business. But when you do a direct investment, you have to be responsible for the determination of whether it's in a targeted employment area. You have to be responsible for whether the Immigration Service is going to deem that you have met the requirement for the 10 full-time jobs. There's a lot of other loose ends that you have to be responsible for. So we certainly can do those types of applications, but there's a bit more responsibility on the investor. And there's a lot of different ways that can go. When you get involved in a regional center, a lot of it's already pre-designed. But there's good regional centers and there's not so good regional centers. There's over 1,000 programs that have been approved amongst the regional centers that have already been established. And there's already almost 900 regional centers that have been approved by the Immigration Service. But there's certainly good programs that you would want to participate with, and other programs where they just haven't had the type of progress or experience to be able to provide a level of comfort that they're going to be able to successfully get the conditions, the conditional residence approved on the initial application and have the conditions removed. So generally, I like to work with organizations that have a tremendous track record of approvals. So there's a few. We've done some work to narrow down the over 800 regional centers to just a few that we could discuss with people. But we're not securities attorneys, so we can't officially tell you which program to work with. But I do feel comfortable, explaining which companies that we've had a lot of success with, because that's just a fact. And if somebody's interested in a program, we could certainly talk to them about whether it has a good track record. So we've done that work. We've done some of that due diligence already, and I'm willing to share that with my clients. There's
Okay.
a few programs that we would like to work with, though.
Okay, I have a question here. So let's say we invest $500,000 in this regional center, and after the 5 or 6 years, once we get the conditions removed, that's when we get the original $500,000 back, or how does that work? The recovery of the money?
Yeah, so you would try to get your investment back after you got the conditions removed.
Okay, and that is a straightforward process. I mean, what are the legalities around getting our money back?
So it's all in the documentation from the beginning.
Okay.
It's all going to be stated in the agreement that you have with the regional center. And it's important to look at those agreements, because sometimes the investments are, what the regional centers do, the ones that I like to work with, what they do is they pool maybe 20 investors together at the same time. So they have $500,000 from each of the investors for this tranche. And the tranche is going to be for one particular type of investment of the regional center, but that might be their 20th or 30th or 40th group. Each group is for a different investment. So each group is for a different project. And the successful entities, the successful regional centers, have projects coming on board frequently. And then when they're done with filling one, they develop another project, and they get that pre-authorized by the Immigration Service. But one of the things that we are aware of is one of the things that we're aware of is the regional centers that are authorized. Sometimes the investments and the projects get completed in a different time frame than when the investment is ready to be refunded to the investor. And when that happens, it's not actually in the investor's interest to get the money back sooner than when he had the conditions removed. So there has to be some provisions in the agreement with the regional center such that if the project gets completed in advance of when the conditions have been removed, there's still a way to have the money reinvested in something so that it would demonstrate to the Immigration Service that the money is at risk and that the project is ongoing, because you need that for the conditions to be removed. So there's sometimes a timing issue, but once again, all that information would be in the legal documents that would be drafted in advance by the regional center. And that's one of the reasons why you have to have your own attorney to make sure those things are being covered, because if the regional center is not covering that, it could leave some exposure. Is that clear?
Yeah, I have one additional follow-up question here.
Sure.
So is there, the investor is putting his money at risk, and his upside is that he's getting his green card. Are there other benefits out of this? I mean, if the investment works well and if there is a lot of money being made, does he get more than what he invested, or how does that work?
I wouldn't really count on any type of return as a business person on the investment. That's really not, that there might be a very minor return, but when you take into account the subscription amount that you're paying to the regional center and the legal fees that you're paying, I don't think you're going to be making a profit on this.
Okay. So now that clarifies it for me. So what, I mean, I heard about the legal fees, but I didn't really hear about the subscription fees until now. So in real, I mean, on an average case, let's say everything works out fine without any major glitches. After the $500,000 has been invested for like 5 or 6 years, how much do we get back? All things considered, including legal and subscription fees and all of that considered. Is it 450, 400, or what is the general rough?
So actually, the investment amount has to be the 500,000, but on top of that, the subscription fees could be $40,000, $50,000, and on top of that, the legal fees could be another several tens of thousands of dollars.
Okay, so roughly you're talking about $600,000 of total cost.
Probably less than that. Probably more like 575 or something of that nature.
Okay, of which 75 will be cost, and you will get your 500 back. So
Right.
basically, it's an interest-free loan of $575,000 with a return of original 500,000 back.
Yeah, there is actually some return, like minor amount, but it's not anything that's worth really planning for.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So I'm going to go to the next slide. So first you would sign the, if you're going to be working with a regional center, and I think that might be one of the safer ways of going is work with a regional center, unless you've got a really developed business plan and you have an intention on starting a business anyhow, and that was always your plan to be a business person. Otherwise, the regional center would be a good idea, especially if you are working with a good program. So you sign the regional center agreement and the subscription documents. You make the investment into the program. You file the initial application, and then the funds are dispersed into the project. And that application goes to the Immigration Service. And that's the beginning of the process. And then what you're looking at is about 2 years for the approval of the conditional permanent resident status. You can check the processing times with the Immigration Service, and they're stated online. It's not all that accurate what they provide in terms of information, but it's a good guide. And then after you get the conditional permanent resident status, you have to wait 2 years before you can apply for the removal of the condition. And that takes about 3 years to get approved. Now, there's several different things you have to be concerned about and aware of. One of the major things is if you're doing this for yourself and your spouse, that's one thing. Both of you would get the status. But if you're doing it for children, you want to make sure that you apply, and you have to get them approved before they turn 21 years old. So if you file an application for a child who is 19 years old, it could take 2 years to get that approval. As long as the priority date becomes current on your case, that child will be considered under 21 and get the green card as well. So there's some calculations that have to be done about children's ages. Otherwise, if the child's over 21, they have to make their own investment. So for example, we had a case with a South African family. The children were over 21. And in that instance, the primary, the patriarch, the father of the family, he made the investment, but then he had to gift his 2 sons $500,000, and they made their own investments. So that's one of the things that you have to be aware of. The next thing you have to be aware of, I think there might be a better slide, sources of funds. That's very important as well. One of the most important things that the immigration attorney has to do is demonstrate where the money came from, and at each step of the way, where did the money go and how did it get into the final investment? Because what the US government's trying to do is make sure that the money isn't being laundered in some way for some nefarious purpose, some illegal purpose. Something illegal. So what we've had to do with a lot of our Chinese investors is we've had to track down, how did they make the money? Did they have a job? Does the job have a salary? Did they sell some property? We have to document the sale of the property. We have to show the money going from one account to the next account. We even have to show how did they afford to buy the property originally. Was it something that was gifted to them from a family member? How did that family member afford to buy the property? If you get into the detail, you can actually document these things. And we'd be happy to work with anybody to demonstrate how that is done. But that's very important. And that's one of the main things that we do. The last slide. This is the priority dates from the visa bulletin from the State Department for December 2018. And as you can see, of course, the priority dates for employment-based second and third preference from India requiring a labor certification, working with a company or a perm, is tremendously backlogged. And that's what makes the regional center and the direct investment EB5 so appealing.
What is the fourth category? Is that like PhDs or?
Fourth category is for like religious workers, special immigrants.
Okay.
It's not going to be something that pertains. Unless somebody's a minister, then we could talk about it.
Right.
So when you're talking about sources of funds, we have to show, how the funds were earned lawfully and what was the path the funds took. And common types of documentation includes, as stated in these 4 bullet points, business records, corporate taxes, personal taxes, judgments, sales of property, records of transfers amongst the family. It could even be a gift. I saw some of the questions involved gifting. You just have to be able to show the note and how the investment was made or how the gift was made. It has to be a real legal instrument. It can't just be, my uncle gave me this money and here's the money. You have to have it documented legally. So, in fact, this is so important that I would recommend people who are interested in doing this and they haven't yet transferred the money from India, that they really shouldn't transfer the money until they have somebody watching over this so that the records can be obtained properly. Before the EB5 can be filed, the investor must demonstrate that the capital was sent from them and received by the American business. So, and we'll get to some of the questions later, but I noticed that there were questions on this issue. We have to document how the investor came to acquire the capital and specifically how it was transferred to the U.S. Regional center or direct investment.
Okay. Typically, for a lot of folks here, it's going to be their savings that they have accumulated over the last few years, or some kind of home equity they built up over the years, or I guess in very rare cases, if it was last year, I would have said they made a lot of money in Bitcoin or something like that. So, but all of those cases, they would be, since it is their earnings, they will be able to use that money to fund their own investment.
Right.
Get green card. Right. Okay.
And we can show what their salary was, and we can show that their taxes, that they earned the money, and that makes sense. And that's fine. But we don't have to show exactly what account it came from and what account it went into. For example, in some of the Chinese cases that we have, there are monetary restrictions where you can't send out over a certain amount of money from China. So what a lot of people have been doing is they've been sending their money out on 10 or 20 different installments to different people. Then the money has to be taken from those people and back into an account in Hong Kong. And then the money is transferred as a whole to the US entity. So all of those transactions have to be documented.
Okay.
Everybody's situation is going to have to be looked at individually and traced back to the source individually. So having said all of that, I think maybe it would be good at this point, unless there's any particular questions, maybe we can get into the question and answer section.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of more questions that came up as we were discussing, and I added everything onto the Google document.
Okay, so I have, I downloaded the Google document, so I have the questions from before. Right now I have about 18 questions, and we'll try to go through some of them, okay?
Okay, I think if you refresh your screen, you will see about 22 questions right now.
Okay, well, I'll have to find that. But I can start with the ones that I have.
Sure. Or I can start reading out the questions. Or
Very good.
Yeah. So let me go through that. Actually, this meeting is being recorded, and actually it will be shared in one of our. We have an online our YouTube TV channel. Actually, the group actually runs, and this is going to be shared in that. So there's going to be a lot more viewers of this. So I want to make sure I read out each of the questions for benefit of people who are going to watch this later. So the first question is, can someone else fund the money other than the candidate? If so, what are the rules?
Okay. So, for example, I mentioned the South African gentleman who wanted to fund the money for his two sons. So what we had to do is we had to show that there was a gift given to each of the sons with a legal document or a note. And we had to show that any taxes that were required to be paid were paid on that gift, but that would be fine. As long as it's documented legally, yes, it's absolutely allowed to have the source of money coming from somebody else. But then there has to be some sort of legal documentation between the parties.
Okay. So the next question, investment amount should be from outside or it can come from income in US, which I think you already answered it both.
Right.
Fine, right?
So it can be from the United States or from outside of the United States. It doesn't really matter. But we have to show exactly how the income was earned.
Okay. And question 3, when applying for EB5, does the government look into each and every transaction in our bank statement from the time we landed in USA to see where the funds came from into our account? So I guess they're asking how far back do they go to see how we ended up with that amount in our bank accounts?
Well, they have to go back as far as it is required to document all of the funds that you're being transferring. So if you didn't start transferring the funds until recently, then it's a limited amount of time. But if you've been transferring funds to accumulate that amount of money since you landed in the United States, yes, you'd have to do it from that time.
Okay. If it was just savings from income that has been accumulated over the years, I guess it's just considered as readily available. You don't really need to go through all of your paychecks and.
Yeah, no, you wouldn't have to go through all your paychecks, but you would have to show from the company what your income was.
Mm-hmm. W-2s.
Show that you've been accumulating that income in your bank account.
Okay. So the next question is, can we use savings from our salary as source of funds, which you already answered? What are the other common sources of funds generally people use?
So sale of property,
mm-hmm.
A gift from somebody else, an inheritance,
mm-hmm.
Just the regular normal way people would accumulate money.
Okay. So let me ask a follow-up question here on an inheritance. For a lot of folks on the call, there are people who have millions of dollars in inheritance in India. Now, most of the cases, it will be millions provided they actually never had to buy it. It came from their parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. So they will not have any cost basis in India. It's just inherited. That's all. So what kind of documentation would you need for that kind of things?
Well, if it's an inheritance, then there would be some sort of estate information about a gift or an inheritance. So there would be documentation in a will or through probate or some legal mechanism of that type that they inherited that money legally. And that documentation would be readily available.
Okay. And in this case, it's going to be mostly inheritance of property, and then they would sell the property and transfer the funds. So they just need to be able to show that they inherited the property. Okay.
Right. So there would be a will that said this piece of property is willed to this other person, X. And then there would be a sale of that property and the proceeds would be in an account. And then we show that those funds moving from that account to the next account. And down the line until they're transferred to the regional center or their direct investment.
Okay.
So each transaction would be documented.
Okay. So the next question is, how soon do we get the provisional GC and the final GC with the current timelines? I think you answered it already, but do you want
Right. So, so what I like to do is I like to use my computer, but I don't know what's going to happen to the screen. If we take
unless you have more slides to show, I think we're done with the presentation, right?
So I'm not sure if you're seeing my screen go to a different.
No, we are not. We are not seeing. We are only seeing your PowerPoint presentation with the.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'm going to check this anyhow.
Okay.
And I'm pulling it up right now. And right now, the USCIS is estimating that the 526 application would take 20.5 months to 26.5 months. So that's how long it's taking.
Okay.
But that information is always readily available for everybody in the public.
Okay. Okay. So it's roughly, let's say, jump 2.5 years, as you were originally saying.
Right. I find that when I look at the processing times that are dictated by USCIS, they're really not always entirely accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Example, naturalizations in Pittsburgh, if you look at the processing times, it says that they're taking 6 months to a year. But I just did 2 this past week for Indian nationals, 2 Indian national women, and they only took us about 2 months. So, the information is there. It says 20.5 to 26.5, but it could be a lot faster than that.
Yeah, actually, another interesting question came up right now as we are speaking. So it's the temporary green card, but apparently a work permit can be attained even much earlier than that, even a matter of few months. How does that work?
When you file the conditional permanent residence, you can also file advanced parole and employment authorization.
Mm-hmm.
And generally it takes about 4 to 5 months to get those documents.
Okay, that's interesting. I did not know about it. So if you transfer the money and everything, you're in a place where your lawyer is comfortable with submitting the paperwork, in a matter of less than 6 months, you will actually have a work permit.
But that would also be requiring that the visa bulletin would state that the visa is available.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. So assuming it continues to stay.
So going back to that slide, pardon me, guys.
Okay.
The slide. So assuming that EB5 is current for India, you see it's not for China. But assuming that EB5 is current for India, then you could file the conditional application with USCIS, and at the same time you could file the advanced parole travel authorization and the employment authorization.
Okay.
And then it would be 4 or 5 months.
Okay, that's good to know. I think that will be a big factor in deciding for a lot of people.
Okay, so back to the questions.
Yeah. So let me quickly see. if someone sponsor us, will they actually track their source of income and bank accounts back in India, which I think you said, yes, they need to show their
Yes.
source of funds for the
So
sponsor.
yeah, if you're getting the money as a gift from somebody, then they're going to track how that person earned the money.
Okay. What are the reasons of not getting or cancellation of our application? I don't know how many cases you have seen, but what are some of the common reasons?
So I've heard of people, for example, spaces opening up in a tranche that's already been closed with a regional center because a Chinese investor who was amongst the 20 or so people that were investing in that tranche didn't qualify because maybe he needed the money back. He couldn't do the investment, or maybe he didn't earn the money in a legal way, so his application was not going to be approved because he couldn't prove that he earned the income legally.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe you're working with a regional center that is just not as experienced as it should be, and they have difficulty. That's the reason why I would much rather go with a regional center that has a very good track record of not just making the investments, but also getting these approvals for its clients.
Right. Okay. Let's move on. How to research and identify the right investment total expenses other than 500K, which I think you explained. It is going to be around 560 to 575K.
Yeah.
All things
I
considered.
mean, that's a good range, but also, when we started off with almost 1,000 regional centers and we did, study them and come up with the ones that had good success rates, we were, as I said, able to boil it down to about 40. And from there, we've been working with several of them. But it's very hard to do that research. It might be difficult for an investor to do the research on their own. So there are organizations that provide that service, and they can even do the due diligence for you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Or best to use a firm like yours who has the research done already. And
well, we'd be happy to help anybody that's interested.
yeah.
Once again, as I said, we're not a securities firm, so we're not telling you have to use this company or that company. We're just giving information.
Right. The next question is, do we have to invest money before applying for conditional green card or after getting the approval, let's say in a year? I guess the answer is before, right? So
yeah, one of the requirements of this type of investment is that the money has to be at risk. If there was some sort of guarantee or you didn't have to do it until you got approved, the money wouldn't be at risk and you wouldn't meet the definition of the law or the requirements of the law. So the money actually has to be at risk. You can't be guaranteed, and you do have to make the investment before you apply.
Okay. Then the next question is, I heard friends or relatives can gift money and there is no limit as long as it comes from valid source, which I think we already discussed this. That's yes.
True.
Can we take HELOC or other business loans and get funds to invest in it? Yeah, you want to talk about it?
So you can borrow the money. It doesn't really matter how you get the money as long as you get it from a legal means, and you are allowed to borrow the money to make the investment.
And there's a follow-up question on that. That money you borrow from somebody, can it be interest-free loan to yourself? Which I think is actually a bit of a tax question, but I will let you answer if you could.
I'm not sure that I know the answer to that question off the top of my head. If I had to, I would be able to find the answer. That doesn't sound like it's a gift because it's a loan.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't really want to speculate about. I would like to get the answer to that question specifically. Perhaps I can provide it to you later. But I don't have an answer to that right now.
Yeah, I mean, as it's a tax-related question. I mean, everybody might want to do their own research. In general, as per tax laws, they expect whoever is lending you money to charge you what is considered a reasonable interest rate. Otherwise, there are some tax implications to that. It would have to be considered as income for you or something like that. So I think it's more of a, somebody's saying that it can be around 1% or less. I guess it has to be that, reasonable interest rate that they're charging. Okay. The next question is, do they know of any TAC, a government approved agency who can assist us with this? And I think you discussed this and you weren't really familiar with the whole.
Yeah, I don't believe there are any government agencies that help with EB5 investments.
Okay.
I'm aware of.
The next question is, what is the next step once we get the conditional GC? In general, we are not associated with the EB5 projects and we don't know the ins and outs of the project.
So you get the conditional permanent resident status, then you wait 2 years, then you can make an application for the removal of the condition for you, your family members that qualify as well. And the local law firm would work with the regional center to gather all the information demonstrating that the regional center met all the requirements in the statute to get the approval for the removal of the condition. So there would be work that would be done largely by the law firm and the regional center to document that everything was done according to what was required. And then there's a submission that's made to the immigration service, and then that gets processed. And the processing time for those types of applications, I'm going to look up. Those applications are taking about 30 to 36 months right now.
Okay. And that's what makes it the whole 5 to 6 years for you to get everything done, right? Okay.
2 years plus 2 years plus 2 to 3 years. So it really could be more like 7.
Right. The next question is, do we need to associate with the same attorney throughout the process till we get the unconditional GC?
No, that's not required. It might make some sense though, because whatever the attorney that you're working with would have all the material from.
Right.
Be less of a work for the attorney to do this removal of the condition if they already had all the other documentation, but it's not required.
And so you generally your firm or a firm like yours charges a flat fees for the entire process from the beginning all the way to actually getting
so we have fixed rates that we charge for the initial process, and we have fixed rates that we charge for the end process.
Oh, okay, got it. Let me see here. If any EB5 project goes bankrupt, what happens to the EB5 applicants who are associated with that project?
So I know that there have been instances where some of the regional programs that are not as well established experience fraud because the people who were involved in setting up those regional centers didn't do what they were supposed to do with the money. In that case, there were criminal charges and lawsuits, and the investors have access to the legal system in the United States. But that's also why it's so important to work with a regional center that has a tremendous track record, because they've got more of an incentive to keep the pipeline going, and they're doing very well. They want to continue to do very well. They don't want any bad press, and they want everybody to be successful. It's in their best interest for that to happen. So if you're working with an organization that has had thousands of approvals, you're in a better position.
So, I mean, money being at risk is one thing, but let's say if somebody cheated us and, for whatever reason that went bankrupt and we lost our money, we're going through the legal system, that's all well and good. But what happens to my conditional GC and removing those conditions? I guess we are back to square one, right? We won't really.
That's right.
Right.
If the project doesn't get approved, there's not going to be a special approval by the Immigration Service without meeting the requirements.
Yeah, so it's a big risk. You lose both a green card as well as money.
Right.
Do we have any money investment-backed guarantee projects, government or private?
So about getting guarantees, that's the whole thing. The money has to be at risk.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
You're getting a guarantee, your money's not at risk.
Yeah, that makes sense.
By definition, not be successful.
Can the candidate himself buy an existing business worth 2 million with 250K down and 250K taken from his relatives and the remaining 1.5 million as loan, thereby creating 15 jobs required for the EB5 category?
Well, if you're buying an existing business, there's a whole line of regulation that has to do with what percentage of the business has increased. So we'd have to look at the level of increase of business and the level of increase in personnel within the company. For example, if you buy an existing business that has 20 jobs and you do this transaction and now there's 15 jobs, you're not going to be creating, you're not going to be creating more jobs by 40%. You're actually reducing the jobs.
Right. Okay.
I think that, that's such a specific question that you're asking. If you want to discuss it with me separately, I welcome you to contact me.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. It's on a case-by-case basis. Can you invest in a family member business with 500K investment and the person owning the business the same last name as the investor?
So if you're trying to do it in such a way where you don't actually let the government know that the person that owns the business is not you, I don't know what you're trying to ask.
So basically they're saying that, the elder brother is in America who has a business, younger brother is in India. So
the same last name, I see.
Yeah.
So it's not a problem if it's the same last name and you're making an investment in your brother's business, but you still have to show that your investment is $500,000 in a underserved area or a targeted employment area. And you still have to show that your investment created the required jobs. And if it's an existing business, then you have to meet the requirements and the regulations specifically about investing in existing businesses. So it's not a problem to do it, but you just have to make sure you're meeting all the regulations.
Yeah. And I don't think this question came up, but let me ask anyway. Is there a minimum salary that needs to be paid for each of these jobs?
They would have to be the prevailing wage for that type of jobs. You wouldn't be able to pay less than the prevailing wage.
Oh, okay. Based upon the nature of the job. Okay, got it. If we were to do direct investment and open our business with $500,000, how much does it cost for economists and other third-party professionals to show USCIS that we hired 10 employees? Money spent on these expenses, is it counted towards the 500K investment?
No, the money that you're spending towards economists and other vendors to prove your case is not counted towards the investment. Okay. And it depends on the
Sorry, Mark, you're still there? We lost you. Hey, Mark, can you hear me now?
Yes, sorry about that. I must have pressed something.
That's okay. Yeah, and I guess when you rejoined it, you were automatically muted. So I just had to unmute you.
Okay.
All right, so let's go back to where we were. Yeah, actually, somebody answered saying that the jobs can even be, and of course, they have to check with their lawyers and all, but they can even be the minimum wage jobs provided. That's what is sufficient for to carry out the responsibilities required by that job.
Great.
Let me see, what are the next questions? Being a non-immigrant, can one file for regional center? In other words, becoming a regional center by himself?
I don't know the answer to that question. I'd have to see the rules on that.
Okay. What is the current time to get temp green card after applying 526? I think you said 2 to 2.5 years.
Yeah, the conditional should take 2 to 2.5 years.
How will the money be sent to USA once investment properly documented? So I think that's more of a money transfer kind of a question. Maybe you can answer from your experience. How do people generally transfer money from India? Have you had clients who did this?
Yeah. So it's usually done by wire transfer. It's better if it's done in one fell swoop. It's just a cleaner transaction. It's easier to document.
Mm-hmm.
When we transferred the money, we have to show exactly what account it was in, what day it was transferred. We have to show documentation of the money going out of that account. We have to show the documentation of the money going into the next account. So we have to contact all the banks and we get those records.
Okay.
It goes into the account in the United States and it might have to be transferred again to the regional center. So that has to be documented both ways as well.
Okay. Let me go to the next question. What happens to our EB5 processing if the government passes a new rule with the revised investment amounts?
So if your investment has already been made, you will be grandfathered under the old rules at the levels that you invested in. So as long as your investment's made while the old amount is allowed, after it's changed, if it's changed, it will stay the old amount for you.
Okay, that makes sense. How will the money be given back to the investor by the regional center if the regional center invested in a project and project didn't complete or still going on by the time the permanent GC is approved?
Well, there's going to be provisions in the regional center's agreement with you that would specify exactly how the money would be given back. So
Okay.
each regional center would have different agreements. And that is something that you have to pay attention to as you enter into the regional center agreement.
Yeah. So the key thing to remember here is your money is at risk, and that is by design.
Yes.
And we got to make sure that we are investing in safe investments.
Experienced regional centers.
Yeah. If the applicant is outside the country, let's say India, how soon can they come to USA?
If they're outside of the United States, then they wouldn't apply for adjustment of status along with the original conditional permanent residence application. So they have to wait until the conditional permanent residence application is approved. And that would be 2 to 2.5 years.
Yeah, so the easier approach here could be to just come here as a student or something like that, and then,
or a visitor if you're in the United States and you file for the adjustment. But then you have to be understanding that you might have to stay in the United States for 4 or 5 months to get the the
condition.
parole document before you can leave.
Right, exactly. If it is inheritance property, can it be wife's property as well, or should be only the primary applicant property?
No, in a marital relationship, it would be fine to be either spouse's property.
The next question is, how will the regional center be investing the money if 829 is not approved yet?
So the money would have already been invested well before the 829 was submitted.
Okay. So
That
actually,
set up at the beginning.
yeah. I think that's a prerequisite to actually be, apply for 829, I guess. Can we use EB2 or EB3 priority dates if the visa bulletin goes back? Probably the answer is no, right? These things are not related to each other.
So let's say you have an EB2 case that's 2010, the priority date, or let's say it's 2013 priority date. And right now the EB5 priority date is current, so it's not really an issue. But according to the rules, just like any other business employment-based case, you can use another priority date as long as the one you're trying to apply for is current. But if it's not current, you wouldn't be able to. So it'd be the same equation that you would have if you had a previous EB3 priority date and you were doing an EB2 and trying to use the original EB3 priority date. It's the same rule. But right now, the EB5s are current.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so it's really not an issue.
Okay. Can the buyer of property?
What I was saying?
I'm sorry.
Was that clear?
I think so. I think what they were asking for is they have EB2 or EB3 from 2010, and this is current. Let's say this regresses to a date older than or later than 2010, and they can switch from one priority.
Yeah, they could use their old priority date if the priority dates for EB5 become even less current than their former case.
Yeah, which kind of defeats the whole purpose of EB5 anyway.
But technically, that's the answer.
Yeah. The next question is, can the buyer of property in India have the same last name? Will they look up to that level? So I guess they're saying that you sell your property to another person with the same last name in India. I guess they don't really care, right? I mean, as long as you're getting the money from that other.
Yeah, I mean, if you're selling the property and you have the money and it's pursuant to a sale of property, it sounds legitimate to me. But if they were to investigate if in fact that property was sold and it was just a paper transaction between people that didn't really sell the property, I don't really know why somebody would do that. But as long as it's a real transaction, it's going to stand. But if it's a fraudulent transaction, there's some risk there, of course.
Right. And what is expedited EB5 processing? Is there such a thing as expedited EB5 processing?
Well, the way to figure that out is to take a look at what is allowed for premium processing right now. So there's a page on the USCIS website. I'm taking a look at it right now.
Okay.
Okay, so the premium processing page at the Immigration Services website doesn't include anything for EB5 cases.
Okay. Looks like there is some history here because this question has a bit more to it. Let me read the whole thing and maybe you can provide some context around
Sure.
it. And how is the regional center qualified to issue an expedited processing? As I saw, not all are qualified for that program. At risk money, there were some fraud regional centers which took investors' money and never completed, and the investors' money is lost, like the one which happened in Chicago. How do you work with those? Looks like there is some center in Chicago which kind of promised some kind of an expedited processing, and maybe that was a fraud all along. So maybe they claimed for expedited processing because they wanted to expedite taking investors' money and running with it.
Well, I'm trying to get some information. So there was a question and answer section with the Immigration Service, but it's kind of old. But back at that time, USCIS was not considering instituting premium processing for EB5 cases. But I'd have to research that to see if they've changed that.
Okay, all right. We can take a look at that later.
Sure.
The next question is regional center or direct investment. Which one is good? If the direct investment created 10 jobs, is regional center process approved by government every year?
So the programs, regional center usually has many different programs that it's sponsoring. And the programs have to be approved by the Immigration Service as well. It really, as you know, throughout this conversation that we've been having for the past hour, we've been talking about regional center investments versus direct investments. And I would feel that if you are a business person and you want to open up a business in the United States and it requires an investment of a significant amount of money, and you're already doing business and that's what you want to do, you want to open up a business in the United States, then don't do the regional center. Just do your own investment and run that business and make that investment. And maybe it's a branch of your Indian operations already. But if you have another job in the United States and you're simply doing this as a vehicle to get your green card, but you're not really interested in running a big operation, then the regional center is a smarter thing. Or if you are an Indian national and you're working in India and you have your business there and you're successful in India, but you want to get green cards for your family members, your children before they turn 21, you have no real interest in moving to the United States and growing a business in the United States because your business is in India. It's not going to really transfer to the United States. And once again, regional center is a better opportunity. So it really depends on what your own personal circumstances are. You should really, you know, the EB5, whether it's going to be a direct or a regional center investment based on what your personal circumstances are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the next question is, based on your experience, how often do the 500K investment is lost or significantly reduced? If the investment goes down after conditional, do we need to do additional investment?
I've never had an instance where somebody had a problem with their EB5 case. The problems that I've heard about have to do with completely fraudulent operations, like what happened in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
We're very careful to work with regional centers that have a tremendous track record where it's in their interest to make sure that all the cases are successful because they've got a pipeline of money that's coming in all the time. more interested in that than they are in any individual investment. They're interested in their business continuing to be able to take in cases. So they've got all the incentive to make sure that their operation's running successfully.
Right.
One of the reasons why we're working with those types of organizations.
Yeah, that's good to know. So in general, how many do you process per year, or how many have you processed over the years until now?
Well, I've been doing this work now for about 27 years.
Wow.
And, at this point, I don't break down the different cases in different ways. I just know that I probably met with 20 to 30,000 people over my career. We get cases from all around the world. EB5 cases are picking up in India. They're a bit backlogged right now in China, so that's kind of reducing. Cases in Vietnam are starting to pick up because there's a lot of investors in Vietnam. The economy's picked up quite a bit there. And we probably have done close to 50 cases over the last several years.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The next question is, can you talk about loan-based investment or equity-based investment in EB5? I think we already talked about that. You can take. Oh, I think they're referring to, can you give it as a loan? No, I think your money has to be at a risk, so it has to be equity only. Any ballpark figure excluding attorney fees for direct investment process other than original investment? I think here they're talking about direct investment. They want to understand, other than the original investment, what are the rest of the fees, attorney fees and everything else included.
Which question is that now?
It is question 34 on the Google Doc. If you
Any
have
ballpark figure for direct investment process other than original investment?
Mm-hmm.
Well, a direct investment is going to be whatever it is required to make that business work. And that's going to be contingent on what type of business it is and what location it is. So it could vary quite radically depending on what it is that you want to do. I would ask the person who asked that question, what kind of business do you want to run? And there's certainly comparables that you could do for that type of business in that geographical area that would give you a perspective. But since I don't know where they want to operate and what kind of business they want to operate, I would have no idea what the ballpark figure would be for that investment.
Okay, that helps. And the next question here is, can you talk about question number 35? Can you talk about startup route? Let's say if the startup raises money from venture capitalist, implies the equity with founders is greater than 500K or $1 million, will founders be eligible for EB5? I think they're talking about a direct route here, right?
Okay, so if yeah, well, that's a legal way to raise money, though. So if you are able to raise money in that manner, you can still, it's just a different source of income, that's all. You have to document that.
Yeah. So the next question is, if the regional center is applying for EB5 for other folks, how much of one's application is dependent on other folks not bailing out or not fraudulent? Okay, I think what they're referring to here is, let's say you went to a regional center and there are like 15 other investors in the regional center, and then 10 of those 15 end up being fraudulent investors with questionable source of money, and then that gets pulled.
So what I've heard when something like that has happened, but I think that it's only happened, I don't hear that kind of thing frequently, but I don't think you would find so many of the investors would be problematic. I think you'd find maybe one would fall out of a group. But if that happened, they would open that one slot to new investors and they'd fill it again.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's what I've seen in the past. And I see the next question is, how much do I charge for the work that I do? And I think that's really something I would prefer to discuss with people individually.
Yeah, that makes sense as well. So I think we are out of questions, and this was really helpful. We had about 75 people join at the peak. As I explained, this is actually being recorded, and it will be shared across the group, which is like 5,000 people actually. So I think there will be a lot more questions or inquiries coming later. So with that, and unless you have anything else to share, Mark, I think that's a wrap. Really appreciate.
No, thank you very much. I appreciate your organization asking me to do the presentation, and Purna, I want to thank you very much for managing this for us. Without you, it certainly wouldn't have been possible. So thank you for your help.
No problem at all, and a big thanks to Ratnakar for introducing you all to us, and I think he's been answering some questions as well on the side, so big help, Ratnakar. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. One second. One question for me, okay? This is Ratnakar. Yeah, ready?
Yes.
Question I have is, again, it's probably all answered. Country of birth, this EB1, EB2, EB3 guys, I have a problem with the country of birth. Like India is backlogged for 10 years, whatever.
Right.
Okay? Now, let's say XYZ from India, who's an H-1B visa here, goes to St. Kitts or some Caribbean islands, gets a citizenship there. If you put in $100,000, they give you a citizenship within 2 weeks.
Right.
Then they can apply for EB1, EB2, EB3 because it's country of birth issue. But there's a visa called E1, E2 visa, the trade visa, which is not, India is not eligible, but other countries are eligible.
Yeah,
they can invest only.
Investor visas, yes.
So do you think that's a good route to get in? Get a work permit and eventual green card?
Well, there's good
because
that, and there's bad parts for that. I have plenty of people that are in the United States on E2 visas, and they love getting them. It's a great way to move to the United States and open up a business and run a business. And unfortunately, there's no treaty between the United States and India that allows Indian nationals to do that. And it's great for the people that get them, but let's say I have, many Mexican investors who are well off and they want to open up a business and they make an investment of over 100,000 and they get that business started, but then they have to renew it every couple of years, every 3 years or so, they have to renew it again and again and again. And it doesn't really lead to a green card itself, but automatically. And if they do that for a while, it becomes very tedious for them.
I thought
it's a great opportunity to be able to move to the United States and run a business, but it doesn't really give you a green card. There is a lot of discussion that I've had with my E2 investors about whether they can build their business up to the point where they can do an EB5. They start out with 100,000, but then they're in a targeted area and they can build it up to 500,000 or $1 million and that can be done, but it's a bit of a tricky transaction.
Okay,
but
makes sense.
Certainly, I think it would be a good idea if you wanted to open up a business in the United States and make sure that you had valid status in the United States and you're an Indian national, get citizenship in a qualified country that does allow for a treaty so that you could do the E2 visa. That would be a good mechanism.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you very much. I think a lot of folks here will definitely contact you, and hopefully they can get a lot of help from you.
Well, I'd be happy to help. That's what we do. I take a lot of pleasure. So thank you very much for your time and inviting me to make the presentation. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark.
Bye.
Bye-bye.